Yeah, welcome to my talk. The title of this talk is Psychology of Security. The subtitle is Security as Human Behavior and Experience. First, I would like to introduce myself a little bit so you can see. Oh, sorry. Human factors. Should work now? Great, perfect. So first, as already stated, I'm the president of the Magdeburg Institute of Security Research. We are a private organization. We are not affiliated with the University of Magdeburg officially. That's too much bureaucracy to get this done, so we decided to make our own thing. I'm also the editor of the Magdeburger Journal zur Sicherheitsforschung. We do have an online access, an open access online journal in our institute, which is online since 3 years ago. Most of the articles hosted are in German, but now we are currently producing the proceedings for the DeepSec conference in Vienna, so we're getting a lot of English language articles. For example, we already have online the English language article from Martin Schütter on IPv6 and Snort, and the next article coming up is by Florian Grunow about hacking medical devices, which gave a presentation also here. I'm a freelance security consultant, I'm a hacker, I've been involved in the NetBSD project for some time. But I studied educational science and psychology with a focus on industrial and organizational psychology and social psychology because I'm interested in social engineering. I do it as a tester, as a pen tester, I use it. But I'm also interested in doing the research behind social engineering, and this is done by psychology because it's about human behavior. I'm also interested in security awareness, and as a psychologist I see that awareness is only the first step. Awareness is great, and you need awareness to get things done or to keep things in mind, but you also have to be able to respond to security tasks, and that means you have to train your organizational members, your workforce, the people who are involved. And the training part is still lacking. We don't have a science or scientific approach on how to train people for security purposes. So the talk here is about our research program that we recently started. The talk is broken down into 6 parts. It's the intro, why this talk, then the fundamental research approach, because I assume most people here don't have a background in scientific psychology or even humanities. Therefore, I'll give a short rundown on how research works in these fields. Then the main topic is organizational development and security. The 4th part is cultural differences, because if we want security worldwide, we have to keep cultural differences in mind. And my favorite part of the research program is didactics of security, how to teach security. That's the relevant part if you want to train your workforce. And in the end, a short topic is the knowledge base we need to know. So introduction, what is it all about? Psychology is an empirical and theoretical science. We describe, explain, and predict human behavior and experiences. This is what psychology does. This is the German definition of psychology. The English language definition, the American definition is a bit different, but this is a definition we use here in Germany, and since we invented psychology, it's okay to use it also internationally. Good? The first psychological research institute was in Leipzig, so it's pretty German. Human development and the internal and external causes and conditions are also researched. This is mostly done by developmental psychology, which is also the father of pedagogical psychology. So whenever someone studies to become a teacher here in Germany, he has to take classes on educational and on pedagogical psychology and developmental psychology. And we also get a lot of research or a lot of knowledge about how to train people from these research. So even this fundamental basic research is required for this topic of IT security. Other parts of psychology that are involved are differential and personality psychology, personality traits. I gave a talk on the Deep Intel last year on psychological profiling for social engineering. That's one point where you can use knowledge about personality psychology, because if you know the personality traits of a person, you can attack them better and more effective. Social psychology, which is actually social engineering, but also industrial and organizational psychology. These are the parts where psychologists actually do work. For example, for organizations and training people in creating assessment centers, creating training courses and such. And this is all the part we use from psychology for this research program. So the next point is, since I have a background in educational science and the humanities, I know that we have to define or explicate the concepts we use. And I wrote my bachelor thesis about how to measure security and wrote 80 pages about the differences of the technical approach into IT security and the psychological approach. And my definition of security is this one here, it's written here. Security is a latent social construct and has to be treated as such. Psychological and sociological method and tools are required. If the security of a system should be enhanced, a diagnosis, prognosis, and intervention is required. And doing diagnosis, prognosis, and intervention is the very core of psychology. This is what psychology is all about. We diagnose things, we do prognosis, and we usually want to intervene. That's psychology. Therefore, I think psychology has a lot to say about security. Security is, from my point of view as psychologist, made by or is concluded by making decisions. Decisions are only made by individuals. Individuals make decisions based on their biography, the situation, and how they perceive their environment. We always have this triangle in organizational psychology. We have the individual person, we have the organization, and we have the situation. And all these three factors influence each other interdependently. So every factor has influence on the other factor, and vice versa. So you cannot use a very simple approach and say there are characters of people or there are personality traits which make persons better suited for security-enhanced environments or not. It's not only the person, but it's also the organization and every situation you're in. So this is my approach. If you want to read something about this has been discussed in German by Niklas Luhmann and Dirk Becker, two professors of social science. Heinz von Förster in Vienna, born, he studied physics, but also he moved to the US in 1946 or 1947 and was involved a lot with the cybernetical movement, with the Macy conferences. And he published a lot of papers on cybernetics and society, because the roots of social engineering, the original meaning of social engineering was how can we design societies with philosophical or psychological methods. And this completely fails. If you want to read about it, read 1984 or Samyatin. So he was a critic of this technological approach, and they discussed it. For those interested in mathematics, George Spencer Brown's The Laws of Form are a great book, and these are used for the social system theory of Niklas Luhmann. So the social system theory Niklas Luhmann created goes back or finds its roots in a mathematical calculus, in a mathematical dogma. Psychology is, of course, the science which researches these topics. Therefore, psychology is required to research security. That's my reasoning why we need psychology here. I also would like to say or emphasize that psychology is the only science able to research the basic fundamentals of security. Computer science or electrical engineering also do a lot of research on security topics, but they are not able to research the basic fundamentals of security, because the basic fundamental of security is human behavior. And as I already stated, human behavior is only researched in psychology, social science, educational science, and such. But this is a basic fundamental. Everything, every computer program, every bug, every security feature is made by man, and men make decisions, and therefore we need psychology to do research on this topic. I have some examples on this. I gave this talk for the first time in Vienna, therefore I choose this example about washing your hands. Some of you might know the name Ignaz Semmelweis. He was a physician. He studied in Pest, Budapest, and then moved to Vienna, and he realized that more pregnant women died in the Vienna General Hospital than in a monastery operated by nuns. And he said that cannot be the situation, that the trained physicians have a higher fatality rate than nuns who never studied medicine. And he did some research about this in the 19th century, and he discovered, or he thought that physicians transmit pathogenic agents. And he proposed that physicians should wash their hands. It's totally normal today to see a physician wash its hand, but at the time of Ignaz Semmelweis, his idea was rejected and he was considered to be crazy. He was sent into psychiatry by his fellow physicians for proposing that physicians should wash their hands. This behavior, or the whole situation, can only be researched and explained by psychology. We even have a name for it. We call it Zeb Advice Effect. Whenever you propose something new, people try to reject it because it means they have to invest a lot of psychological work into creating a new worldview. They have their worldview. For example, at the time when Semmelweis lived, the pathogenic agents were not known. There was not much knowledge about bacteria and viruses and such. Therefore, people didn't know how these pathogenic agents worked. It was only 30, 40 years later with Robert Koch and Louis Pasteur that people got to know about the pathogenic agents. Therefore, Semmelweis completely failed with this proposal that physicians should wash their hands. Another example, more or less from IT security, this nice firework is Ariane 5 Flight 501. Some of you might remember in 1996. The first flight of Ariane 5 ended after 37 seconds with a 300 billion euro firework because there was some problems with the software development. One of the problems with Ariane 5 was that the software for the control mechanisms was taken from Ariane 4, and there was a typecast error. But usually, when you program for space flights or for the air flight industry, most programs are done in ADA or compiled with ADA, a programming language, and they have a lot of security checks. It's not your average GCC compiler, but it's a special compiler which emphasizes security. And of course, they've also done simulations of the flight. But they never realized that the Ariane 4 developers disabled several safety checks and security checks because Ariane 4 never reached the speed of Ariane 5, and therefore there were no problems with typecasting. Unfortunately, Ariane 5 was much faster, had a bigger acceleration, and ran into problems with typecast. The numbers, the values were greater, and this is what happened at the first flight. There was a typecast mistake. The computer thought the rocket is currently going down, and therefore the self-destruction button was hit, and the computer destroyed the Ariane, including all the satellites aboard. And the research was done. There's a report available by the ESA, European Space Agency, about this incident, and the problem was that the safety measurements of the safety checks were disabled by the Ariane 4 developers, but they were fully documented. There is a project manual, and it was written down in the project manual that they have been disabled because these problems will never apply at Ariane 4. And the Ariane 5 developers read that project manual, but they never turned the safety checks back on. And this is something we usually discuss in organizational psychology, knowledge management. Why do people, they read, or it was described and explained what they should do, but they didn't do it. This is usually the problem you also have when you try to implement standards, some ISO 9001 stuff or something like that, where you have standards how people should behave. And most of these standards don't go down on the psychological level of people knowing rules but ignoring them. My favorite example for this is there are so many physicians in Germany, medics, who smoke. That's actually, it doesn't work. They are physicians, but they smoke. They should know that smoking is bad for you, but they do smoke a lot. And this has to do with a lot of psychological factors. Other examples, weak passwords. The discussions about weak passwords is at least 25 years old, if not even older. But still we have users who use weak passwords. We have currently a program in my hometown where we try to train teachers for schools and teenagers in school, and most of them don't even understand why they should use a password. So we have to explain them what user is, user management, passwords and such. And they have no idea how the system, the computer, the technology works, and therefore they don't understand why they should use a password. Users are not interested in security. That's a typical problem. Most users are just interested in using their computer or in doing their work. Now, when doing security awareness campaigns, the system administrators or security guys are usually perceived as the bad guys who force me to do esoterical stuff like entering a password or locking my desk or something like that, and they don't understand why security is relevant, and they are therefore not interested in. Users don't understand security, but we still have problems. Programmers create buffer overflows and forget safety regulations. Ariane 501 is one example. But the buffer overflow is well documented, well known, and can easily be prevented by the programmers. But still we have programs with buffer overflows. My favorite example is the OpenBSD PF with the remote executable buffer overflow, which gave the attacker root rights. So you see, even in a computer operating system that focuses on printing t-shirts and doing security is doing such mistakes. Administrators forget to patch or don't patch their operating systems. This also has to do with that admins are usually not formally trained. There is no formal scientific base or science-based training for system administration, at least not here in Germany. You can study computer science, but computer science usually has a different approach than only system administration. Another problem is, of course, that system administrators often are ignored by the management level. They don't get well funded. They have not enough workforce. They are ignored, and that has to change. Developers use MD5 as a password hash. Think of 2 years ago when, how was it, beim CCC, der Hack mit dieser Security Boot aus den USA. Wie hieß die nochmal? Goddamn. This shadow CIA from the US got hacked 2 years ago. No, not HB Gary, the other ones, where all the former CIA agents work and they do security reports on Stratfor, the Stratfor hack. The Stratfor user database was stolen and every password was only hashed in MD5. So it only takes some hours to get, I used my old 5-year-old MacBook, and the first 30% of all user accounts were cracked within 20 hours. So this can be easily prevented by using a different password method, or even by such simple methods as using a salt. But developers don't use it. Social engineering is a completely different topic. My approach is that social engineering can never be prevented. Social engineering aims at manipulating people, and whenever you introduce a new security, a new technical security barrier, you're creating a new approach for me as a social engineer to attack your organization. So the typical approach in the IT security process is, we need more computers, we need more technology, we need more programs that monitor the people, and if the people behave in a bad way, we should get an alert or shut down something or something like that. Computers are not able to monitor human behavior. Only humans are making decisions, and my approach is that you have to train your humans, your workforce, to create security. You cannot get security, especially in a social engineering context, with technical measures, because all technical approaches have to be Turing computable. You have a Turing machine sitting here, and Turing machines can't make decisions. So yeah, we started this research program. The first idea for this was the Vienna program for cyberpeace. I gave a talk 2-3 years ago at the DeepSec in Vienna when all this talk about cyber war blew up in the media. I said, let's stop this discussion. Cyber war is not possible, at least if you use the Clausewitz definition of war. Let's talk about creating security. Let's talk about cyberpeace. So I wrote a program with some steps that have to be taken. And psychology of security is one fundamental part. There is a lot of research lacking in this area. There are areas where psychology plays an important role. For example, there is engineering psychology, which plays a vital role in space flights, air flights, air industry. Also, the people who operate nuclear power plants are usually trained in their psychological human factors stuff. So there are examples we can use as a role model for this, what we are doing here. And we started with the program. The first research phase is 3 years estimated, and we started just 2 months ago with this research. So what do we need in this research program? We need fundamental research about the perception of security. How do people perceive security? Why are users ignoring security? Why are people like us so interested, so focused on security? What makes us happy in researching and hacking and breaking stuff? Why do most people ignore security? How can this be changed? We need a fundamental didactics. And this has to be funded by this fundamental research. This is really a low-level research approach from psychology, but it has to be done. Without this, we don't know how people perceive security, and if we don't know this, we can't do any further work. We need some research about personality, attitudes, and security. Are there personality traits that correlate with security-aware behavior? For example, there is the Big Five. It's the standard model we use in personality psychologies. There are 5 factors for how a personality can be described, and one factor is openness, openness to new things. And I assume that most hackers have a very high level of openness, and other people not, and one could make a hypothesis that openness as a personality trait correlates with security-relevant behavior. But this hypothesis has to be made empirically sound, so we have to do empirical research. We have to give out questionnaires, we have to measure or try to measure security, we have to measure the personality traits of persons and try to correlate these and see if there is any influence. This is basically what is done, for example, in assessment centers. So whenever the human resources department is trying to hire new people, they do this. They use this methods as their basis for deciding who fits into this organization and who does not fit in this organization. And there might be, this might be a good base we can use for the further development of organizations. Another part, organizational development, knowledge management, these are all parts that are relevant because organizations have to evolve, have to change, and there are several theoretical approaches on how organizations should work and how organizations are able to survive in changing markets. The economists, management guys are very interested in these topics because if your organization can change, you survive in an evolving world. Think of the car manufacturers, a lot of them died in the last 20, 30 years, and for example, Toyota and Volkswagen have completely different approaches on how their organization is organized, but yet they are both the most successful car manufacturers worldwide. Another point, cultural differences. Of course, there are definitely cultural differences regarding IT security. My favorite example for this is the death by fen, which is apparently prevalent in South Korea. In the 1950s, the South Korean government created several posters which stated that if you leave your fan on during night, you will get cold and then you will die. This was actually done to get the persons to save electrical energy because they had a lot of problems because of the Korean War and such. And this propaganda was widespread, and people in South Korea now often do believe that if you leave your fan on during night, you will die because of the cold. And this only works in Korea because they have this had this propaganda in the 1950s. And there are also other stuff, other differences coming from different cultures. My favorite or my most interesting part, or the part I'm most interested in, is didactics. Is about the teaching methodology of security. How can we teach security for different people? How can we reach them? How should teachers try to teach all that security stuff? And of course, the last part, what to teach, the facts we need to teach. Does every end user have to know about elliptic curves, how RSI works, or is it sufficient if he knows which options he has to pass to GNU-PG to create a secure key and how his password should be designed? Or does the user need to know more? So now going to the part of fundamental research, what do we do in these subtopics? The perception of security, like I already mentioned, we take the radical constructivistic approach, which is pretty common here in Germany. The whole German school system is based on this constructivistic approach. There are other school systems. There are other school systems which are still rooted, for example, in behavioristic approaches, where people get trained like Pavlov trained his dogs. The basic of constructivism is that each individual perceives the world in one's own way. And the way how people perceive the world is shaped by their former experiences. So even if 100 people are sitting here, even if 100 hackers who studied computer science here in Germany are sitting here in my talk, every one of them perceives my talk in a different way. Every person has its own worldview. And we have to explore this worldview in depth. This is usually the first step when doing new basic psychological research. We're going to do a lot of qualitative research, doing interviews with people, psychological interviews, not media interviews, but psychological interviews, where we try to explore why people ignore security, why they are not interested in security, but also we want to interview IT security personnel, hackers and such, why they are interested in it, what experience shaped their worldview. And this is the longest taking part because it's a lot of work doing qualitative research. It's also a lot of work getting people who want to be interviewed, because most people, or actually we do need to get people who are not interested in IT security and participating in our questionnaire and our interviews, but those people who are not interesting, we usually cannot reach. So there is a huge problem in getting empirical sound data. The next point, we have different tools and methods for such. For example, qualitative semi-structured interviews. We use also the autobiographic narrative interviews. It's a method developed by a professor in Magdeburg where people just talk about how they there is no English word for it, how people deal with new experiences in the biography, how they change their worldview of themselves, or how they change how they create the view they have of themselves. And this is analyzed, and this might help in changing what shapes the hacker's mind and the normal IT security, the normal IT user's mind about IT. So we are interested in doing research with hackers, with researchers. The fundamental question is, what shapes a hacker's mind? How do users perceive IT security? How can this perception be changed? Perception can be changed. The problem is only it needs resources, it needs time, it needs money, and how can this be made in a better way? And then the next part is, are there science-based security awareness tools? So there are a lot of companies offering security awareness campaigns, and they design awareness campaigns, but most things they do are not science-based. They are just doing something. Sometimes it works, sometimes it does not work. We want science-based awareness tools, which means we can predict, at least in a range, if they work and how they work and in which situation they work. So we want to make it a science and not only something we try by trial and error. Risk homeostasis is my favorite topic from industrial psychology. It's about risk behavior, and risk behavior is controlled by different variables: personality traits, organizational traits, situation you are in, and other stuff. And risk homeostasis is a phenomenon that has been researched very well. It's about self-perception, subjective skills, objective skills, perception of risk, risk acceptance and such. For example, there are two different ways of skills or skill sets. There is a skill set which you self-perceive, and sometimes users think they know something about security, but if you just measure it objectively, you realize they don't know anything about security. So people are sometimes sometimes people think that they have understood a topic, but in reality they didn't understand it. Now this applies to everyone, and you just have to find the right topic where someone does not know something about. So this is the first problem we have. For example, this is addressed in industrial psychology, for example, air traffic controllers and pilots. They get a tough, thorough training on these factors, so they know that they, when they run into these problems. The workers in nuclear power plants are trained, motor vehicle operators. There was a study in East Germany in the early 1990s. The typical taxi in East Germany was a Volga, a Russian-built or Soviet Union-built car, which had no electronics aboard. No? It was of the technical standard of the 1940s, 1950s. In the early 1990s, the taxi drivers in Dresden switched over to new Mercedes-Benz taxis. And the result was that there were more accidents with Mercedes-Benz taxis than before with the Russian-built old-style cars, because the taxi drivers were now had now the problem of self-perception and risk assessment. They thought, there are a lot of computers in my taxi. We now have airbags and ESP and all this stuff in our taxis, and now I can can accept more risk. There is a lower perception of risk now, and therefore they created more accidents because they thought the car will save their ass if they if they drive too fast or something like that. And the result was that there have been more accidents with the more modern car than with the old ones. And this is the most interesting study, empirical study done about this topic 20 years ago in Dresden, and it has been replicated. And another experiment was done in the US with bicyclists who wear a helmet, and whenever they wear a helmet, the car drivers who take them over are leaving less distance to the bike because they are wearing a helmet. And if they are wearing a helmet, they are protected. That a bike helmet does not protect much against a 2-ton car, which is driving with 100 kilometers per hour besides you, is usually ignored. But this is one of the effects. So the variable changed in this experiment was wearing of a bike helmet versus not wearing a bike helmet. And you could predict if the bicycle driver wore a helmet, the distance between car and bike was significantly lower, because the car drivers had a different risk perception. Or from IT security, when I was administrator at our university, we introduced an enterprise Sophos antivirus thing, and when we installed and rolled it out, the users came to us and said, oh, great, now I can visit all these shady Russian websites because we have an antivirus installed. That's the same problem from IT security. Like already said, personality and security, there are different theories of personality. The biggest difference between humanities and psychology and sciences like computer science or electrical engineering or math is we don't usually have the one accepted theory, but we have different theories, and you cannot prove them correct or incorrect, or you can only try to invalidate them, but you cannot prove them to be correct. We want to examine personality traits and security relevant behavior, because personality traits are very stable over lifetime. This is the definition of a personality trait, that if I make a test with you when you are 20 years old, you will have almost the same results as if you are 40 years old or 60 years old. All these traits will not change much over lifetime, unless, for example, motivation. Motivation is very volatile and it can change within minutes. When you wake up, you're motivated to change your life, and then after breakfast you sit there, I'll spend another day on Reddit. And looking at kitten is much more fun than cleaning the house or something like that. The most popular is a big five, which consists of all these neuroticism, extraversion, openness, I hate this word, you can read it, and agreeableness, consciousness. Whenever I try to, I don't get it. Another psychological theory is the theory of motives. People have usually different motives, which can be examined. Motives are also stable over lifetime, and motives are usually a huge factor in motivation. You could say in an object-oriented programming, you would say these are the father classes or something like that. They influence the motivation of people, and there are several motives, for example, power, achievement orientation, and others. And nowadays, or currently, a lot of journalists, especially in American newspapers, are using these motives to describe what is Putin doing in the Crimea conflict. For example, the power orientation of Putin is very high, therefore he wants to invade Crimea and such. So the question is here, how do they correlate with security-relevant behavior? We are going to do empirical research, and then we want to develop methods and tools which can be used to predict human behavior in different situations. Read assessment center, training methods, and such. So this is the fundamental thing we need for organizational development, for training in organizations, and also for self-assessment. Organizational development and security is a huge topic. It's about management, it's about training, it's about how organizations work. And currently security is a huge and hot topic in companies. Lots of money is spent on security awareness and training. There are lots of different methods in knowledge management, leadership, organizational development. These are topics researched by psychology, by social science, by economy, management theory and such. So a lot of people are working on this stuff. but there are no studies or theories on organizational development and security relevant behavior. There is some work done in regards to information security or, for example, standardization approach like ISO 9001 and such, getting the certificates for your system administrators and such. But this is more or less the standardization approach, which usually ignores the behavior of the person. So, for example, a standard usually states your system administrator has to be trained in course 101, and if he has a certificate, he will always behave security compliant. But as I already said, organization and situation have a huge influence. Even someone with a correct with a correct formal training in security, IT security, might do insecure stuff from time to time, like the physicians who smoke. One point is strict hierarchies can easily be attacked with social engineering. You just have to use that hierarchy. But also organizations with no hierarchy, which is actually an oxymoron. Every organization has a hierarchy. It's just coded in a different way. All those fancy new market web design agencies that were created in the early 2000s also had a hierarchy, but they used a different encoding for the hierarchical models. They didn't use the BMW car or the huge desk, but they had different encodings, and they also have hierarchies. So every organization has a hierarchy, and every organization's hierarchy can be used in social engineering attacks. You just have to find out how this is encoded. It's pretty easy in the military because the hierarchy is printed here on the shoulders, but in other organizations it's also there. You just have to find out how these codes work. Now this is a lot of work, for example, done by Pierre Bourdieu, a French philosopher, who spoke about how groups or how the group behavior is used to determine if you're in this group or not. For example, the rich people or all the people who get managers in the large companies because they have behavior. Even if I study economy and work up to get to those levels, they still knew that I'm coming from a working background, or working class background, and not from their money background. Cultural differences, the fourth point. Culture influences organizations and individuals. There is a lot of debate about culture. There is a lot of discussion about cultural differences. There is, for example, cultural awareness training. There has been a nice ad in Germany from an agency that offers such cultural training, and there are two German managers visiting China, and they are invited to a lunch. And the senior German manager says, we're in China, and I've heard that you have to eat all the lunch that's on the table, otherwise you are offending our hosts. And actually it's vice versa in China. You have to leave some lunch on your platters. If you don't do this, you will get more lunch, because the host has to provide enough food to for the guests. So they eat and eat and eat, and every time they finish their platter, they are happy that they have shown respect to the Chinese culture. And the Chinese look at it, and you hear them in Chinese, oh my God, those Germans eat so much, bring more meat on, and then they bring in more meat, and this ends in a loop. And this is one example. It's how culture influences behavior. And here the question is, what are the differences in different cultures and how can they influence security? For example, the management style or leadership style in Germany and the US differ a lot. And this also has to do, for example, with the formal TVET system, the Technical Vocational Education and Training System. That's the system in which we train our trainees here in Germany. We have a very, very formalizational approach, a lot of certificates, we have formalized trainings. These do not exist outside of the German-speaking countries. Austria, Switzerland, and some parts of the Netherlands also have such systems, but most countries don't have such a system, so we cannot export our approaches here. Other countries do on-the-job training. For example, in the English-speaking countries, there is a lot of on-the-job trainings. Other countries, for example, Spain and France, have a more theoretical college approach, where a lot of training is done at colleges, and people get their degrees and then go into companies. And then they have to be trained on the job to fulfill their job requirements. So we have lots of tools and methods that already exist. There are a lot of research results, but we have to check if they can be transferred to our problems. I think there will be a lot of problems, but we can easily check if this influences IT security and IT security behavior. So now coming to my favorite part, didactics. Didactics is the science of learning and teaching. I'm currently doing a master's in international vocational education in Magdeburg. It's a cooperational program between my German university and an English university about this vocational training. And didactics is a huge topic at our research and in our university. And the first thing our professor of didactics says, this is also a pretty German science, because we have a lot of discussion and research about this didactical methods, because we have this formal training system here in Germany. We have the universities, we have our TVET system, where the trainees are trained in schools, and therefore all our teachers working in those schools have to be trained in this teaching methods. And for example, if you compare the German Wikipedia site on didactics with the English one, you see a huge difference, because the German site is really huge. And I said, okay, let's use Wikipedia to translate all the concepts, because I have to find the correct terms. And then I switched over to the English language Wikipedia, and you have only such a small stub there on didactics. So I see that this is one of the first cultural differences we have. It's about teaching methodology. It's very well researched here. It's well funded and empirical sound, because we have to train our teachers in this stuff. And we do also have, since 1997, IT professions. So people can get trained in the German professions called Fachinformatiker, which means you don't have to go to university, but you are trained in a TVET school. And you have your practical training in your trainee company, or in your training company, and you have your theoretical background you get in the TVET school. And there are several curricula existing for these professions. And we are currently developing a new curricula for the German Fachinformatik, for those IT system administrators, with a focus on IT security. And of course, we also have to provide the material for the teachers. The teachers have to be trained on how to teach this stuff. And we have to check what they have to know. So the question might be, do they really have to understand the mathematical backgrounds of elliptic curve cryptography, or is this something you can only learn at university when studying mathematics or computer science? And other discussions. So we have to discuss what they want, or what they have to learn, and how they have to learn, or how it has to be taught. So the main question is, how can we teach security? Which method works best under which circumstances? Is it the scientific mathematical approach necessary if you understand cryptography? Can you do a hands-on approach? Is a crypto party a good method to teach people cryptography? Does e-learning work, blended learning, facts, theory, practical approach? There's a huge discussion, because usually the companies in Germany usually claim that, for example, students know a lot of theory, but not enough practical stuff. So here we have to examine or find a good balance between these parts. The culture is relevant. In Germany, the TVET model is very well accepted. We export this training model via the UNESCO to different other countries. For example, our university is responsible for Southeast Asia. So we are training Chinese teachers, and they absolutely do not accept the practical hands-on approach in Chinese professional schools. Professional training in China is there are 200 students in one room, and then there is a teacher standing at the front desk, and he is showing how to solder some IC devices together. And this is projected to the wall using a projector, and that's their practical approach. So the students watch their teacher doing something. That's not practical training in Germany, because practical training here means that the students are soldering on themselves. They have to do hands-on. This is a huge discussion. It's a huge problem when different training backgrounds and cultural backgrounds are involved. We have a well-researched model here in Germany. It's called Competence Model, or competence or capacity as it used in psychology. It's not about the formal competence of being allowed to do things. It's a psychological approach of being able to do things. It evolved from the behavioristic approach and other theoretical backgrounds. And it's currently introduced or currently rolled out in every German TVET school. One point is, which makes it great, is not only facts are taught, but also studying and research methods. So every trainee who is now trained in the new model also learns how to teach himself or how to learn new stuff. Because there is the so-called problem of obsolescence. All the methods taught in the TVET school are somewhat obsolete. For example, my father is a trained plumber, and he was trained in the early 1970s, and the stuff plumbers now learn in school. They have computer stuff, they have new material stuff, polyurethane and all this plastic stuff they never had in the 1970s. So my father would not be able nowadays to work as a plumber because all the methods changed. And of course we know in IT they are changing even faster than in plumbing or electrical engineering. So the trainees also have to learn and understand and know that the method they learned might be obsolete one time, and they have to learn how to get the new facts to train themselves. They should be able to organize their own further education. Independent learning is emphasized, how to keep their knowledge and what to learn. How is the biggest problem when talking about didactics is pretty easy to develop a curricula or a list of skills that should be trained, but we also have to make background for the teachers on how this has to be taught. So what are the best methods to develop those competencies? Should they learn the mathematical approach of how a computer works? What is a Turing machine? What is Turing computation? What is a von Neumann architecture? And then they can try to prove with some mathematical stuff that viruses work and how viruses work, or might it a better idea to give them a Metasploit and a Metasploitable virtual machine and let them use Metasploit to hack into a computer? So the hands-on versus theoretical approach, I think it must be balanced. Project work and other stuff are methods we can use. And something we still have in Germany when doing the training is the masterpiece. It's actually the idea the guilds had back in the 12th century. Whenever you're finishing your training process of usually 3 years, you have to do your masterpiece, which has to be presented at the Chamber of Commerce, and then you have to present it, discuss it, and when the people that think your work is well done, then you are now a trained or skilled labor, and you get a certificate and you can work on your own. And this process has been used in Europe for several hundred years. It has been abandoned in a lot of countries, for example France or England, but we kept it alive here in Germany, and we now still use it, and it is a good thing to make people able to do practical stuff. So they don't only get the theoretical background, but they are actually able to lead a project on your own, to do work and get an examination after that. Who has to learn what? Of course, there are several roles in IT security: system administrator, developers, end users. We have to find or create different roles and determine what each role has to learn, which is actually pretty easy, but the how to teach it and how it should be learned is more different. I already spoke about what. And web-based teaching. We are interested or currently cooperating with several organizations on creating web-based teaching. E-learning, blended learning is an interesting approach. In the US, there is currently a huge discussion about these online trainings like Khan Academy and other stuff. We want to develop a curriculum, a modularized curriculum with different roles. So we want to start with a basic training for everyone, and then we want to build several models for managers, for system administrators, for developers, because they all have to know different stuff. And we also want to include those people who are not working in IT jobs, for example, managers, all the clerks working in the office, because it's usually a clerk that gets that reads most of the emails, and they get attacked by phishing attacks. It's not the system administrator who fails for such stuff, but usually the lady is sitting at the desk and answering all the emails coming in at info@.com and so. So we want to adapt it for different roles. We want to use different methods, including mobile learning, and we also want to include tests and certification. And online training is nice, but without certification, it's hard to get acceptance for it. And we have to find some ways to certificate the people who attend this training so they can present a certification when they apply for jobs or when they want to get better payment because they now have better skills and such. The last part, knowledge base. A huge problem with IT security is too much information is floating around. So when you look up a problem, you always find a lot of websites, and maybe 90% of those websites are actually outdated. I had a huge discussion about this with some friends when I did a workshop at university on using LaTeX for writing technical documents or for writing documents. And when you Google around for several problems you might encounter when using LaTeX, you find dozens of websites, and a lot of them are outdated, are wrong, have been made in the 1980s or not 1980s, 1990s. There was no web, but if you check the Usenet, you find some statements from the 1980s. So the problem is there is so much information that many people get overwhelmed by it. And that's also one of the problems why a lot of companies or people don't use open source, for example, Linux or FreeBSD or such, because when they have a problem with the Windows computer, they always know someone who knows more than them and who is able to answer their question. But when they are changing or switching over to Linux or FreeBSD, they now have to Google around, and they cannot say which information is correct and which information is pretty much made up bullshit. And that's a huge problem that also exists in IT security. For example, there was an article in a German newspaper about secure deletion of hard drives because some politician was involved in this. And the first thing that came, yeah, please use the Goodman method. It's 33 times writing over your data. But most people don't know that Goodman analyzed hard drives in 1994 and looked at the coding methods they used, and modern hard drives don't use this coding methods anymore. Therefore, Goodman's algorithm, as stated by himself, is obsolete. But people see, hey, it's 33 times. 33 times is bigger than 7 times, therefore Goodman must be better. Because they don't know that all the technical background completely changed. And this is one huge problem in doing those trainings. So we have to find methods to identify correct knowledge, create maybe a knowledge base, some kind of Wikipedia of IT security. But then the question is, who decides about these contents? Who are the experts who are able to decide this? Is Bruce Schneier the only one who understands cryptography, and therefore he should be the one demigod who is able to decide if cryptography knowledge is good or bad? So what to do? I'm almost finishing. What do we have to do? We have to finish the fundamental research. We have to discuss what to teach. We have to do research about cultural differences. And we have to find adequate teaching methods. That's our agenda. There's a lot more things to do, but that's the current program we are running, because we have to break it into several tasks. Just another information, the copy and paste didn't work. For those speaking German, I published a book 1.5 years ago together with a co-editor, political scientist. It's mostly about the cyber war discussion. We have some technical articles and some articles from political scientists about all this international conflicts, cyber war and such. The first chapter is an article by me, or a chapter by me, written about cyber war. And the last chapter is written about cyber peace. And there you find a lot of information I gave in this talk. So if you're interested in, you can buy this book. Or you can use our online journal, because all the chapters are also published in our journal. Upcoming days, those of you who are interested, we are currently working together with the Chamber of Commerce in Potsdam, in Wernigerode, on hacking and social engineering. In May, I will attend the AusCert conference in Australia, Security in a Post-NSA Age. It's actually a talk that also emphasizes psychology of security, but also the whole social approach, how societies should react on this stuff. And I hope that more people are interested in a talk if I use these NSA buzzwords. Actually, that's also psychology, because they rejected I've submitted this talk with a very scientific abstract. It was rejected, and the buzzword bingo NSA stuff was accepted. Okay, but as a social engineer, I can live with this. I can prepare for it. Here are my contact data. If you're interested, you can mail me. It's our website. The website is currently only in German, but our journal, which is linked there, is also available in German and English. So we have German language articles and English language articles. We're currently working on the DeepSec proceedings, which we will publish in the next weeks, or whenever we get a chapter, we finish it and put it online. We don't have fixed release dates. We use the NetBSD approach, not the OpenBSD one. My email address, we have a YouTube channel with a lot of videos, mostly also in German, but also some of the DeepSec videos are up there. I'm on Twitter, but I only use it like the East German government used newspaper. It's just a channel so I can communicate to my believers or followers. I'm also in Xing, a German language professional social net, PGP number, PGP fingerprint, and the QR code for your mobile phone. If you trust me, you can use this to get my data. And I'm done. Time for discussion? Or?